Good morning to the community of Noorat and the surrounds. My name is Raj Samrai and my co-host Julie Owens will be taking you through this presentation entitled Fire Safety Essentials. Fire Safety Essentials presentation will last approximately 1 to 1.5 hours. There's no need to take notes because all of the resources that we refer to during the course of this Fire Safety Essentials will be available through the resource and download information. I can't get my teeth in this morning. Sorry, folks. By downloading at the end of the presentation. As is traditional, I would like to first of all do an acknowledgement of country. And in this acknowledgement of country, we are really saying an acknowledgement to the traditional custodians of the land on which we are hosting this online meeting today, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and of course, any other Aboriginal people that may be present here today. What I'd like to do at this stage is introduce Julie and allow her to explain the technology that we're using today. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you, Raj, and good morning, everyone. Yes, we are in a webinar. This means that you cannot turn your video or your audio, and you'll be able to interact with us by answering polls and using the chat function. Excuse me a minute. Sorry. We are recording the webinar, as Raj says, but that is for our benefit, not for yours. And part of the recording will not you will not be part of the recording. That is simply for our I'm as bad as you, Raj, if I get my words out. Yeah, that will be purely for our benefit. And obviously, yeah, it might be good once we do this recording. The interaction will be through the chat and the polls function. So we might just have a look at the chat function now. If you hover your mouse over the chat function down the bottom of the screen or the top of the screen, depending on your device that you're on, and you click that open, you will be able to communicate with us by typing in. Make sure that the to is all panelists and attendees, and that way you can type any question or comment that you have for us. The other function that we have is the polls function. The poll, we will be asking you to respond to questions in the polls function. It's completely anonymous. We don't know, we know if you've answered, but we don't know who has answered what. So, and then we'll close the poll and you will be able to view the responses of that. Mm-hmm. So let's have a practice of the chat function. If you'd like to hop on the chat, open the chat function and just let us know where you are. What part of Noorat and surrounds are you from? Just where you live and perhaps how long you have lived there. So if you use the chat function to do that, that will be good. And we'll monitor the chat function throughout the presentation, so you don't have to use it just when we ask you to. You can use it at any time.
Yeah. It might be also a good idea at this stage, Julie, just to mention that the raise hand function is also available. If people want us to have their attention, raise the hand and obviously make comment through the chat function.
Yeah, if you've made a comment and we've missed it in some way, raise your hand and then we'll know to have a look at the chat function.
Wonderful.
So we might have a practice of the polls now, Raj, if that's all right. So I'm going to open a poll. I will share the poll with you, the audience. And this is a very simple poll that asks how long you've lived in the area. Have you been to a CFA meeting before? And how did you find out about this session? And then how do you rate your knowledge around fire? So this is just to help us understand who we're talking to, basically. So if you just click on how long you've been in the area, have you been to a CFA meeting before, and how did you find out about this session, and how do you rate your knowledge around fire? So once everyone's ticked on that, I will end the poll, and once I've ended the poll, I will share the results, and you will see that there's a few people who have answered those questions. Thank you, Raj.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for that introduction there, Julie, to the technology and the way that we are going to communicate with each other. Now, this is a crucial part of this presentation. It's a new area for the CFA to deliver presentations in an online format. It's very much a test ground to make sure that we are on the right path. So use the communication tools, use the chat function, as Julie explained, use the raised hand, and of course, be responsive to the polls. The polls, as Julie said, are totally anonymous. We don't know who's saying what. It's all about learning from each other as well. Okay, let's go into the learning outcomes. What is it that we are what are the core messages that we want to get over today? And, I assure you from the onset, this is not going to be death by PowerPoint. That's not our intention. It's about a degree of an engagement that we can have through a better understanding of fire. What are the local risks in your area? What is it about Noorat that makes it more vulnerable or more susceptible to fire than other parts of Victoria? What can we expect from fire? What is fire when we get below the flames? It's not just flames that make up fire, there are other components. What's the communication thread? How do we know if there's a fire in our area, and how do we respond to that fire? As is critical in any emergency management situation, planning and decision-making is absolutely crucial. We emphasize the need to have a fire plan, the need to leave early. Of course, the best laid plans can fail. And when they do, what are your options? How do you stay safe? How do you survive if you've left it too late? If you're caught out in a bad fire situation? You need to have plan B, you need to have plan C and plan D. And we'll talk more about those as we progress. As I say, as we go through this presentation, feel free to make comment using the chat function. This presentation is for you and to empower you to make informed decisions in the event of a bad fire day. Let's move straight on. Understanding local risks. What do we mean by local risks? Well, first of all, this fire safety essential presentation is tailored to your locality, to the locality of Noorat and the surrounding areas. Noorat is located in the municipality of Corangamite, and I'm sure you all knew that. The township is located at the base of Mount Noorat. It's actually a dormant volcano, which is considered to have Australia's largest dry crater. Now, when I did some research into this, this was most surprising to me. Australia's largest dry crater. So there's one big feather in the hat for the community of Noorat. The town's population currently stands at 333. And interestingly, one of the big considerations that I'd like to make here is that as Julie and I do a lot of these presentations face-to-face in a lot of our rural and remote communities, we always get this genuine, almost authentic sense of community cohesion. The fact that everyone is looking out for each other, everyone is in it together, everyone knows everyone. And it's that very sense of community cohesion that actually underpins the strength of the CFA, the Country Fire Authority, and its work in fire prevention. Let's move on to understanding a bit more of those local risks. Why is it that Victoria is one of the most bushfire-prone parts of the world? It's because of the changing landscape. Victoria itself has a landscape that actually is multifactorial. We have areas or parts of the state that are grassland, bushland. We have mountainous forested areas. And of course, we have a large and surplus supply of farmland. And Noorat is no different to this. Victoria is, as the slide clearly shows, very fire prone. And we've had a season last year of unprecedented fire activity in our state. Let's just roll back the clock slightly and talk about our Indigenous heritage. Let's talk about the fires that were started by lightning back in the day. Let's have some consideration to the Aboriginal people who actually have used fire for many thousands of years to actually care for country. These fires were a tool that encouraged the growth and extent of grassland to enhance hunting, for one reason. It managed to reduce levels of fuel, and we'll talk a lot about roadside fuel load as we progress through this presentation. This burning also kept the vegetation low so it could actually be passable. It wasn't something that reduced their ability to travel around. So these are all the benefits that our indigenous forebearers had in this regard. When we talk about records and record keeping, it's interesting to note that record keeping only really started in about 1851, at the time of the early European settlements. Okay, so there's a bit of background around Noorat and its particular contribution. Let's go to the next level of thinking now. And here we're talking about a map that shows in a color-coded format the different fire districts that exist in our state. Okay, it shows what I call the different weather districts. But the interesting point to take home from this is that each fire district will have its own level of fire risk. So East Gippsland will be very different to the Northern Country, as will the Southwest and Wimmera or Mallee. Each one will depict its own level of fire risk. Let's just peel the layer back a bit more now as we take into consideration what we call the seasonal outlook. What is the seasonal outlook and what does this mean? The seasonal outlook actually describes the overall weather that's happening in that particular weather district. Some of you may already know that we are in what is referred to as a La Nina pattern. Let me just move on to the next slide to give you a graphical representation of what La Nina actually means. La Nina conditions are expected to reduce the risk of prolonged fire activity across most of Victoria compared to last year. Okay, so that's a good sign, isn't it? For our communities, for communities like Noorat, this La Nina effect should hopefully bring a sigh of relief when it comes to the risk of high fire activity. It should be lessened. Let's just move that on a bit more. La Nina itself is exemplified certainly by the map on the left-hand side by high temperatures, particularly north of the tropics, high daytime temperatures. However, this is coupled with a large amount of rainfall, particularly south of the tropics, and we've certainly experienced that in our part of the world. I'm sure you'll all agree. The last La Nina effect actually happened during the winter of 2017-18, and its counterpart, or its cousin, El Nina, was actually last experienced 2018-19. So you can see that these two weather patterns take it in turns to be around. One season will be La Nina. There might be one or two seasons before the next El Nina comes along. Very different in their makeup. So what does this weather phenomena actually mean for the community of Noorat? Noorat itself is in a part of Victoria that has experienced slightly above average rainfall. And we understand that through La Nina now, don't we? This above average rainfall has consequently meant more moisture in the ground. More moisture generally means more growth. In our instance, it's actually prolific fuel growth, prolific grass growth. This is then coupled with a very rapid drying process when the temperatures get high, as they have done in recent days with 30 degrees plus in many of our locations across the state. We have seen a natural, rapid drying, and in CFA terms, we call it curing or drying of that fuel load. So we have a combination here of, okay, we have a lot of rain that encourages the fuel growth naturally. And we love that in this part of the world. I know Noorat has lots of really fertile paddocks and areas of green that the farmers exploit to the max. And so they do, so they should. This then is dried rapidly by high daytime temperatures. This combination of rain, drying, increases the rate of growth of our fuel. Like every fire season, there is a need to be prepared for a fire that could happen at any time as a result of this high fuel load. If I can move on to the next slide, and this will allow us to get a better understanding of why the La Nina effect is of particular importance to communities like Noorat. I think, Julie, if we open up the chat function at this stage and ask our attendees to offer some, how would they describe the landscape in their area, in the area of Noorat? Is it woodland? Is it bush? Is it plantation? Is it forest of some kind? Is it grassland? So we might just let our attendees offer some comments in that regard first.
So what we're asking is, what sort of landscape do you live in? Do you live in town with those paddocks around you? Do you live beside the mount, as Raj has explained? Just if you give us some indication of where you're actually at in that locality.
Wonderful. Okay, well, look, thank you for all those that have responded to that chat function. And yes, you're all right, 100%, that the predominant fuel in our area, in and around Noorat, is actually grass and areas of bush and bush along roadside as well. So we could, from that, we can make the assumption that in the event of fire, your area will be particularly at risk from fast-moving grass fires. Okay, that's the one take-home message from many parts of our locality, of our rural Victoria, is that fast-moving grass fires are more than likely going to be the order of the day as a result of La Nina. What does this actually mean? What's the dynamics of grass fires? Well, a big important player when it comes to grass fires is actually wind. Wind is the driving force that causes fires to move in a particular direction. A change of wind direction equals a change of fire front direction. And then, as is the case with Noorat, which is not a particularly flat terrain, there are areas of inclinations, hills, particularly Mount Noorat, as we've clearly said. The topography or the lay of the land affects the direction and also the speed of that grass fire. In terms of our understanding of grass fires and hills, it's important to note that grass fires will travel faster uphill than they do downhill. And there are two factors responsible for this, and that's what we call the convective heat and also the radiant heat. They are key players when it comes to accelerating the acceleration of fire up a hill. So, as a rule of thumb, for every 10-degree rise in inclination of a slope will actually mean a doubling of the speed of the fire. A very important point, because often we can become quite complacent when we see a number of hills separating us and the advancing fire front. We think we've got time on our sides because fires have to climb up hills and come down hills. But if the conditions are right, if there's a strong driving wind, if the fuel is plentiful, as is the case currently, that fire will reach your home far quicker than you might think. And that's why the CFA are strong advocates for moving away from danger, leaving early. Should there be a change of wind direction and the fire goes in a separate direction, in a different direction, so be it. As long as you're not there, should it continue to come in your direction.
We might just stop it there. Well, not stop it, Raj, and actually open up another poll, just launch another poll. This one's a multiple choice poll, and this is asking us what you think the local risks are in your area. You'll see that we have nominated a number of risks, If you would just tick those, which ones of those you think is a risk in your area: the winding roads, trees hanging over access roads and escape routes, high tourists in summer, the speed of grass fires up to 20 kilometres an hour, as Raj has said, numerous grass fires sparked by embers, and high fuel load. If you would just tick what you think might be your local risk, and like we said, there is no right or wrong answer here. It's what you think. And when you've done the polling, just remember to press the submit button at the end. So thank you for that. I'll just end this polling now and share the results. And you'll see that everyone thinks that at least one of those things, and more in some cases, are local risks to your area. Thanks, Raj.
Thank you, Julie. And this is a really important poll because it actually localizes information to you. Not all our towns are impacted by high tourism. They might have industry. I know Noorat in particular has its sort of freight trailer service, for example, and other farming and sort of infrastructure that relies on those roads. And as some of the feedback has said, there are a number of windy roads that would be very difficult to access as well as exit in the event of a fire. The fact that we have trees hanging over some of those roads is also a big concern because trees have large limbs, and if they were to catch fire in the event of an ember attack, and we'll talk more about what ember attack actually means, they can actually result in what we call canopy fires, fires at the higher level of the tree, which will ultimately cause a large amount of smoke and plumage, and consequently cause a falling down of large limbs, again limiting access and exit from your township. Of course, the speed of fires we've already mentioned, and the relationship to hills, and also the amount of fuel that's around. We're going to spend a bit of time talking about embers, so I'm not going to labour too much on that at the moment, but suffice to say that embers are a big consideration when it comes to fires and fire safety. So I'm going to close out of my poll now and move on to the next slide, which actually looks at the capacity within our township, the capacity of your local brigade, its members, and its resources. In the case of Noorat, we have one tanker and one pumper. These two items of machinery, of firefighting equipment, have to look after a population of 333 living in 151 dwellings. And what we like to pose here is that rhetorical question around, well, how realistic and how confident would you be to see a CFA crew and tanker at your farm, on your drive, at your home, protecting you from a fire? Bearing in mind that the same resource may be pulled in other directions, fighting and assisting other fires in the locality. Now, today, we've tried to give you an understanding of some of basic understanding of fire behaviour so far. We've tried to give you an awareness of the various risks that exist and reinforcing that need to have a plan. We can't count on our brigade to be there for us. Let's just assume that they're not going to be, because then there's no expectation. And take the bull by the horns and take ownership of the situation. Have a plan, be prepared, move away from the danger the moment you sense something not right. Don't put yourself in harm's way. So, what to expect from fire? Fire is this force of Mother Nature that is uncontrollable, that is unpredictable. Like many natural disasters, it claims lives. It's our mandate to protect our community members, but we like to think that we can empower them to have a knowledge of fire such that they can also help themselves. What I'm about to do is share with you a very graphic and quite disturbing, I would say, animation relating to ember attack. If there are those members watching this morning that in any way sensitive or feel that this could be a bit alarming for them or traumatizing, we suggest that you look away for 1 or 2 minutes for the duration of this animation, and then rejoin us at the end of the animation. So I'm going to share my screen, and this is Ember Attack animation.
During a bushfire, embers will reach your home long before the flames do. Ember attacks are the most common way that houses catch fire. Embers are burning leaves, twigs, and pieces of bark. They help the bushfire spread by starting spot fires ahead of the main fire front. Short-distance ember attacks happen when leaves and small pieces of bark are blown from burning trees. The intense shower of sparks that forms fills the air with hot, burning embers, which will land on nearby vegetation and properties. The hot embers can easily land and get into your clothes and burn your skin, eyes, and airways. Small fires will start all around you and quickly become uncontrollable. The resulting chaos creates confusion as the fire seems to come from many directions, meaning it will be difficult to make good decisions about your safety. The experience will be physically exhausting and emotionally traumatic. Long-distance ember attack is caused by large bushfires that generate intense heat. As the hot air rises, it forms a column of smoke that sucks in air like a vacuum, increasing the intensity of the fire. The updraft in the column lifts embers, like large pieces of burning ribbon bark, hundreds of metres into the air, where strong winds can carry them many kilometres beyond the fire front. On Black Saturday, embers travelled more than 30 kilometres ahead of the main fire. When these embers land, they often start fires where leaves naturally accumulate, like in gutters, doorways, and garden beds. So while you might think you're safe when a bushfire is far away, embers can fall from the sky and land around your home long before you even know there's a fire. But remember, your home isn't the only thing under threat during an ember attack. By the time you realise the danger, it might be too late as escape routes become jammed. Embers can also start fires on roads and block them completely, making late evacuation dangerous or impossible. That's why leaving early, before a fire starts, is always your safest option.
You know, it's quite amazing, isn't it? You know, we see, and I've seen that presentation many times over, and every time it still has that same degree of impact. Fire is dangerous and it is unpredictable. It is designed to give you that element of, hey, this isn't nice. I don't want to be in that space. And if that is the case, job done. By far, ember attack is the biggest cause of property loss during the fire. And this slide shows you some of the images of a fast-moving grass fire encroaching on property, encroaching on our beautiful landscape. And of course, the aftermath of fire as well, the burnt ground, the lost properties, and obviously the lost lives as well. What I'm going to do now is share another component of fire. Actually, before I do that, I might just make one more mention to embers. Okay, ember attack is one way that our properties can ignite and become combusted. However, there's another concept called direct flame damage. Okay, direct flame damage is this idea that you have a fast-moving grass fire or a fire front that encroaches on your property because there is a continuity of fuel. There is no break in the fuel line to your house. What do I mean by that? Well, they often say that if you've got fuel to your door you will have fire to your door. Mitigate that risk. And both Julie and I are passionate about risk management and reducing that element of risk that you put in yourself. Let's mitigate that risk by encouraging a break, a divide between you and the advancing fire front. Have a gravel drive, for example, an area of dry ground that's not combustible. A veggie patch sometimes may do the trick. Or other forms of a divide that prevent that continuity of fuel. So we've had ember attack, we've had direct flame damage, and now I'm going to move on to talk a bit more about radiant heat. And again, and green grass as well. Having an area of green grass. Thank you for that, Julie. Having an area of green grass around your home as a green belt, if you like, that won't burn as fast, and make sure that grass is low as well. What I'm going to do now is share our second animation with you. It's entitled Radiant Heat. The content is self-explanatory. Again, it may be disturbing to some of our listeners and viewers, so please look away and rejoin us at the end of the presentation. So I'll stop share this at the moment, and I will locate that animation for you.
And as Raj said, ember attack is one of our greatest losses of property. And as you will see with radiant heat, it's one of our greatest loss of human life.
Thanks, Julie. Radiant heat.
Victoria is one of the most bushfire-prone parts of the world. Every summer, bushfires threaten properties and lives. But did you know it's not the flames that kill most bushfire victims? No, it's the radiant heat. Most victims die from the effects of radiant heat long before they're reached by the flames. Radiant heat is what you feel when you sit next to a campfire. If a campfire heats up to 2 kilowatts per square metre, you'll feel that it's too hot and will want to move back from the fire. If you don't, this amount of radiant heat is enough to cause burns and blisters in as little as 40 seconds. At 12 kilowatts, it can cause some materials like dry timber to ignite. A bushfire can reach 100 kilowatts, and the effects can be truly catastrophic. For humans, radiant heat can cause burns from 100 metres away and cause a dangerous increase in body temperature. Radiant heat can cause the rapid onset of heat stroke. Heat stroke damages your brain, meaning you won't be able to concentrate to make good decisions as the fire arrives. Other impacts include severe damage of internal organs and death. There are some things you can do if you're caught in a fire. Cover your skin with long-sleeved natural fibre clothing, like wool. It's also useful to know that radiant heat only travels in straight lines and can't bend around corners. So, sheltering behind or inside solid structures may help protect you. But be aware, radiant heat will travel straight through glass. The best defense against radiant heat is a simple one. If you're not anywhere near a bushfire, its radiant heat can't hurt you. Leaving early is always your safest option.
I very much hope that those two animations have given you a better idea of the threat that's posed by fire. Threat to us in terms of the dangerous nature of radiant heat and the blistering and the cognitive impairment and that inability to make informed decisions. Why be there? Why be there when we know that ember attack causes the biggest loss of property? And of course, radiant heat as the biggest killer in a fire. Why be there? Why risk being there when the option would be, yes, I hear you all say, leave early. Have that fire plan, Make sure that everyone is on the same page and leave early. You can always come back. But to be out of harm's way, away from the ferocious, indiscriminate nature of fire, is going to be the best way. One thing that the CFA will do following a fire event is to interview in an empathetic manner members of the public that were impacted by the fire. And what I'm showing you here is some of the verbal testimonials from such people and the impact that the fire had on them. And I think that the words here speak volumes. Now, to reinforce this emotional impact, I'd like to share one more animation with you. And this particular animation gives us an idea of some of the levels of, I guess, at the end of the day, lack of preparation, if you like, that was evident when these people were caught out in a fire situation. Now, this animation, or this bit of video, is entitled, "I'll Never Do That Again."
Raj, this is actual people.
10 years ago, when all the dams were full and the tanks were full and there was plenty of water, I probably would have stayed and I would have died.
Nothing went the way we might have anticipated.
Whatever preparations you put into place, you only need something small to go wrong.
You know, in future, I don't think we'd want to put the kids through that sort of trauma, I guess. Yeah, wouldn't put the kids through that again.
If it was my choice, I wouldn't stay again. If we had another day like that, if I had the opportunity to get out, I would go before the fire even got here.
Before the fire even got here. And yes, Julie, these were actual people. They're not actors for the purposes of this presentation. These were actual descriptors from people that lived through a real-life fire situation. They spoke about the trauma and that emotional intelligence when it comes to not putting the kids through that. It wasn't worth it. And this is the message that we want to get across to as many community members as possible. We're trying to layer our story by saying, you've got too much to lose by staying. Why stay? Why create that extra trauma in your life? It's not worth it. So today, what does this all really mean to you? You know, we know about fire. We know about the nature of fire and its unpredictability. We've spoken about the intenseness of the heat and radiant heat. We've spoken about the means by which fire can arrive at your doorstep through ember attack and direct flame damage. We acknowledge that they are both killers, both loss of property and loss of life. What I think, Julie, you're about to launch another poll around some of those factors that might impact on your ability to make good decisions at these times.
Thank you, Raj. Yes, this is another poll. It's a multiple choice one. So either tick one, all, or none of that you think would impact your ability to make good decisions. So after watching those animations and listening to those people talking in a fire situation or any high stress situation, what do you think would impact your ability to make those good decisions? And stress, of course, is the first one there. Rapidly changing situation, things not going to plan, not having enough time, and a communication breakdown. So like I said, it's multiple choice. You can tick one or none, all of those. And I'll just end the polling here and share the results, and you will see that everyone has ticked at least one of those things that will impact. And I think we've shown that that's exactly true. Each of those things will impact your ability to make a good decision. I'll stop sharing the results now.
Yeah. I think I'll just want to pass comment on a couple of findings from some of those results in that particular poll. Stress by far is the biggest thing that's impacted by everything around us. We are not designed to handle handle stress in any particular way. We don't have that strength. Some of us may, but the majority don't. When we're put in a situation that might mean that the situation is rapidly changing around us, and particularly if you add the layer of not knowing what that situation is, not knowing about fire, not knowing about the nature of how devastating fire can be, this will actually increase our stress burden beyond a shadow of a doubt. When things don't go to plan around you, when you're not in control, that actually compounds stress also. The element of time and running out of time, there's nothing more stressful than not getting from A to B in a set time because you've got an appointment or you've got to meet someone or your life depends on it. Stress is compounded by time and lack of time. Ultimately, communication. Communication is pivotal to managing the situation. Do you know where the children are? Is your husband on the tractor? Did he pop out and he didn't tell you where he's gone? You lose your ability to think clearly because you're no longer in control. And this is what stress is, your inability to be in control, to be on top of your game. We're suggesting to be on top of your fire game, understand fire, and take those preventative actions to be prepared. Have your fire plan, leave early. What are the triggers going to be for you to leave early? And that's a nice segue into our next slide, which looks at really talking more about, well, how do you know if there's a fire? How do you know and what to do? So at this stage, we might open up the chat function again, Julie.
And just remember that anytime during the presentation, you can use the chat function to make a comment or ask a question to us. But our question at present is, how would you know if there was a fire in your area? What are some of the tools that you have to know if there's a fire in your area? And before we actually, thank you for people, just type in the chat function and Raj and I will monitor that. But before we actually go into that a little bit more, and Raj will explain some of those tools a little bit more, we might go into the fire danger rating. Everyone will have seen these on the highway outside of fire stations, on the internet, on TV. Fire danger ratings are an indication, well, they're to let you know what sort of fire weather we have for the next day. Before I actually go any further in explaining that, I might just see what you think by launching another poll. So the next poll asks you, what does the fire danger ratings actually mean? So I'll just launch that poll. Are they an indication of how likely a fire is to start, or an indication of how bad a fire would be if it were to start? And in the southwest region, how many code red days have we had? How many severe or extreme days have we had in the last 5 years? So if you just tick one of those each, just to give us an indication of what you think. And thank you for that. I'll end the polling and share the results. So some of you might be surprised by your answers that the fire danger ratings actually are an indication of how bad a fire would be if it were to start. I'll explain that in a little bit more, in a little bit. The code red days in the last 5 years in the southwest region, there's been none. So there's been no code red days in the southwest. There've been some in the state, but not in the southwest. And severe and extreme, there've been six extreme or severe days. I'll just stop sharing those results. Just talk a little bit more about what each of those ratings mean when you see them. A fire can start any day. So even in winter, we have fires. So on a low to moderate day, you may have a fire. On a high or a very high day, you may have a fire. But a fire on those days would be fairly easily or would be able to be controlled. So on each of those, we're fairly confident, CFA is fairly confident, be able to control that, get on top of those fires. It's when we come to a severe day that it is much more difficult to, the fire may be uncontrollable. On an extreme day, it'll be hot and windy and dry, just like on a severe day. All of those factors together means that if a fire starts and takes hold, it will become uncontrollable, unpredictable, and fast moving. Spot fires will start, move quickly, and from many directions. On a code red day, the conditions are worse. It is hot, dry, and very windy, and they're the worst possible condition for a grass or bushfire. Homes are not designed, and people are not designed to withstand fires in these conditions. So that's why we say that leaving early in a high-risk area is your best option. And that includes bushlands or grasslands. So you need to think, as Raj has been saying, about what your triggers are to leave early. So that explains a little bit about what those fire danger ratings mean. Remember that the danger ratings indicate how easily or how hard it would be to control a fire in those conditions. So now we might go back to Raj, and some people have put in the chat that how they know if there's a fire, TV, radio, those sort of communications. That's how they know if there's a fire. But I think you've got a little bit more to add to some of those.
Yeah, I certainly have. Thanks for that, Julian. Thanks for giving us such a clear explanation of what the FDR is all about. And we're going to link that all in as we move through the presentation to bring it all together. So going on from that point, when we talk about the busyness of life, you know, the fact that we are, and I have to acknowledge this, we are all busy. And sometimes we can get very normalized in all the multiple bits of information that come to us in all directions, far more than ever before. Do you know, I remember back in the day where it was just a newspaper, or you heard it on the radio, or someone told you when you were chatting to them. You know, that's before the advent of social media and all the digital platforms and other technologies that are out there. You know, this slide shows many of the commonly recognized logos for Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you name it, they're all there. And what I like to do is I refer to this as what we call infobesity, a massive overload of information 24/7 in a multitude of platforms, okay? The important point to take away from this is we talk about formal as opposed to informal means of communication. All those that are highlighted on this particular slide are what we call informal means of communication. Informal in the sense they are not evidence-based, they're not real time, and are they totally credible? Are they totally legitimate? Can we expect and accept that these are correct? No, we can't. The CFA are very strong and stand by the following formal means of communication, particularly when it comes to emergency management and the awareness of what's happening in our environment. By far, the most important means of this formal communication, which is evidence-based, it's real time, and it's credible, and it's legitimate, is the Vic Emergency app. Someone mentioned that in the chat earlier on. The Vic Emergency app is a great way of keeping in touch with the outside world in the event of a fire. Even pre-fire, it can actually be used as a means of planning your journey, your route away from a fire-prone area. The app allows you to monitor conditions as they evolve following or during a fire day. It's a #1 tool that we strongly recommend. As a PAVS presenter, PAVS is an acronym for Property Advice Visit Service. It's a community door knocking service that the CFA provide, to inform community residents about how to prepare their property to stay fire safe, and also how to be aware of what to do if a fire were to come along. Having that all-important fire plan, knowing what your triggers are to leave, and we'll talk about those very shortly, and staying safe and looking after community members and vulnerable members of the community. This slide also shows a number of other means of formal communication, including the Vic Emergency Hotline and, of course, Emergency Management Victoria Online. They are a few of the credible, suggested sources of formal information. One that I'd like to pay a bit more attention to is local news and the importance of local news, particularly ABC. Julie, is that 774?
774, yes, correct.
774 ABC local news. This could be your lifesaver should you ever get caught in a fire situation. We stress the importance of having a battery-operated radio for the very reason that in the event of a fire, there's a high likelihood that communication antennas will go down, and consequently, there'll be no means of formal communication, telephone, internet, etc. A battery-operated radio will provide you a lifeline to the outside world in the event of a fire event. Tuning in to 774 ABC, an emergency channel dedicated to emergency management, could be your way out. So that's a strong reminder that the importance of having an emergency kit that contains a battery-operated radio. What I'd like to do now, with Julie's help, is talk a bit more about the makeup of the warning system that exists, a triage warning system that exists to keep you informed of fire activity. Julie?
Thanks, Raj. Yes, the CFA will give you these warnings as a fire or an incident develops. So the first warning you might get, and it comes across the internet or your phone, is an advice. And the advice is just simply to tell you that there's an incident or a fire in the area. You need to monitor the situation. You need to keep ahead of it. You need to work out what's going on. A watch and act means that that situation has now developed. It's actually getting worse, whatever it is, a fire, or, and you need to actually do something about it. Now is when you implement your fire safety plan. So you need to actually act. An emergency warning is usually issued when it's too late to do anything. You need to shelter in place. You need to stay where you are because you are in imminent danger. So all of these things, even though the CFA give these warnings out, we still advocate not to wait for a warning. Then there's a couple of other levels of warning. Evacuation is where if you have an evacuation warning, it means it's time to leave. It's time to evacuate to your designated place. CFA can't tell you to evacuate. Police may do that, but that also gives you a warning that there is imminent danger and you need to get out. Community information are usually newsletters, and they happen after an incident or a fire to let people know what their next step is, where they can go to get help, where they can shelter if their house has been destroyed, where they can go. So they're usually after the imminent danger of the fire. But once again, the CFA advocate, do not wait for a warning. And the next little slide that Raj has got might demonstrate what that means, because you might be ahead of the warning. So let's say that a fire starts. And when a fire starts, there's usually not anyone around. So it might be 5 minutes at least before someone sees that fire and reports it to 000. So they've reported it to 000, which means the brigades in the area get the notification to turn out. So they'll take another 5 minutes or more to turn out. So we're already up to 10 minutes and the fire's developed. There's nobody there yet. And you'll see where your house is on this line. So not very far from the actual fire is your house. You're sitting inside, you're watching Netflix, it's a hot and windy day. Perhaps it's not code red, but it's severe. Perhaps it is just a severe day, and you've just received an advice message to say that something's happening in your area. But if you look at this animation, you will see that it is very close to your house. So you haven't received a watch and act, but 20 minutes later, you'll receive the emergency notification, the emergency warning, but the fire's already past your house. It's too late. You haven't got the watch and act. You haven't acted because you were waiting for those warnings rather than looking out and watching and being aware of your surroundings yourself. So this just shows you that what could happen if you are going to wait for your warnings. So the message is you might be ahead of your warnings and you don't want to wait for them.
I think this particular representation carries that very clear message to take ownership. And when we talk about taking ownership, it's about knowing your environment. And this is all about a lot of you community folk know your environment because you live on the land. And many of you have lived, as Paul said earlier, or chat function said earlier, have lived in the area for a number of years. We find this with all the communities and many of the communities that we speak to. You have an intuitive sense of the environment. When you know, you instantly recognize when something's not quite right or not quite as it should be. And this is what we suggest to you, to use your senses and respond to that intuitive nature. If you see something, if you see smoke on the horizon, if you see activity that's out of the normal, if you see a darkening of the sky, a different coloration, a different sense of environment around you, if you hear noises, if you're living near a woodland or a plantation or a forested area and you're hearing limbs that come crashing down or the sound of crackling, burning vegetation, these are all telltale signs, and it's not rocket science. I'm absolutely positive it's not rocket science. It's just being connected to your environment, knowing when something's not right. The sense of smell is a powerful sense to use. The smell of smoke. You may see embers or ash dropping around you. And they may not be very big at first, but become bigger as the fire intensifies or gets closer to you. These are some of the reasons and some of the senses that you should be using to stay connected. So you are ahead of the fire game, ahead of that risk of potential fire impacting you. Certainly look at the warnings, be mindful of using all the tools around you, your FDR, the fire danger rating, but ultimately it's about you taking ownership and responding to the environment, seeing what you're seeing around you, the heightened activity, that sense of unrest perhaps. Listen to the local radio, and again, ABC radio for the emergency warnings. When we talk about planning and decision making, as we're progressing towards the latter part of our presentation, planning and decision making is absolutely crucial. And what we're going to try and do now, with all the many elements that we've already spoken about, I'm going to take you through a hypothetical situation that looks at all those elements: the fire danger rating, an understanding of radiant heat, the big emergency app and its importance. And we're going to bring it all together to give you, propose a scenario that allows you to think through the situation. And Julie will assist on this to give us the narrative that finds and defines this story. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Raj. Okay, this is a hypothetical. I'm going to tell you a story, and I want you to put yourself in this situation and think about what you would be doing and feeling at this time. So it's a hot, windy day, and it's 8 o'clock on Wednesday morning, and you look outside and you see that it is already hot and windy. The you checked fire danger rating the night before, it comes up on the news, and it's an extreme day. So you know that if there was a fire to start, it would probably be uncontrollable. You're in just out of Noorat, you're amongst the grasslands. There's a few trees on the property, and you can see, can almost see the front forest from your property. So you look out and you think, yeah, well, no, I've really got to pop into Warrnambool and do a couple of things. So it's 8 o'clock. I'll do it first thing in the morning, and I'll be home for, in the heat of the day in the afternoon. So you hop in your car and you run into town, you get into Warrnambool, you do what you have to do in the morning, and then you think, stop at the local cafe. You think, I'll have an early lunch before I head back out to Noorat. So you're having lunch and you hear people talking about a fire in the area. It's hot and windy, so it's a bit hard to see, like there's a bit of a haze, but there's always a bit of a haze around Warrnambool. You don't know if it's a sea mist or whatever. You look around and you think, I'll have a look on the Vic emergency app. You look on the Vic emergency app, and yes, sure enough, there is a fire in the area, but the little indication of where that fire isn't near your home. It's sort of, it's getting there, but it's not quite near your home. So you think, okay, I'll have time to hop in the car, run home, drive home, grab a few things, just assess the situation, see what's going on. So you jump in your car and you're heading home, and the road's blocked. There's police there, and they tell you that you can't go home, that the road is blocked, there's trees down, the fire is in your area. So what are you going to do now? You can't return to your home. What do you do, and how do you feel? What sort of things would you be prepared to do now? Would you be prepared to turn around and go back to Warrnambool? Would you know someone that you can spend some time with? What would you actually be doing if you couldn't get back into your hometown, into your home? We might at this stage actually launch a poll. So this poll is going to ask you to think about those questions and answer them. So on a typical Wednesday, 8 o'clock, where would you be last summer on a typical Wednesday? You live in Noorat, but would you be at home, work, or on holiday? Thinking about last summer, before COVID, would you be prepared to spend a few nights away from home in an emergency like this if the police have turned you around? Is there someone in Warrnambool or Mortlake that you could stay with? Would you be prepared to spend a few nights away from home? And last summer, did you have an emergency kit packed with some clothes, important documents, photos? If you had to spend that time away, did you have that emergency kit packed and in your car? So once again, there's no right or wrong answers. We don't know who's answering which question. And don't forget to hit the submit button when you finish the polls. And I'll now share the results, and you can see that some people were prepared to spend that night away. Some people had the emergency kit. And yes, people were either home or at work on that time. So I'll just close that poll now. Have you any comments to make, Raj, before I continue with the hypothetical?
Yeah, I always find this particular poll quite interesting from an analysis point of view, because we're all here to learn and find out a better way of being prepared. And that's what the function of this presentation is. There was a clear split there between those that had a kit and those that didn't have an emergency kit. So the learning here is that, hey, we need to have a kit. We need to have something in place that's ready all the time, particularly during the fire season, that's good to go with all our essentials. And we'll talk about that shortly. And secondly, the fact that the majority of people did not have an option of where they would stay in the event of being told that they couldn't go back to their homes. So it's this kind of preparation that's so crucial when it comes to forward planning for the summer ahead, planning for a fire season. So those are my comments there, Julie.
Okay, thank you, Raj. So we'll continue with a hypothetical. It's the same Wednesday. You've been into town. You've done what you need to do. You've heard that there's a fire, and you've decided that you're going to hop in the car and go back home. And you're not going to stay. You're going to grab a few things, because you can see that indication of where the fire is, where it's impacting, is increasing on your Vic emergency app. So you can realise that you probably couldn't stay there, or you don't want to stay there. It's an extremely hot and windy day. So you hop in your car and you get home. This time you get home and you're really aware of where the fire is. You keep looking at your Vic Emergency app, but you run into the house. You've got the cat cage at the door, so you know where that is. And the cat, is sound asleep on the spare bed where you left her. So you grab her and put her in the cage, race her out to the car. That's good. Now you decide, our passports. We're planning a holiday later in a couple of months. You need the passport. So you run into the house, into the filing cabinet, and you get the passport. And while you're there, you decide, well, yes, perhaps you better get the insurance papers. Oh, no, you were looking at them the other night. So no, they're sitting on the table next to the chair. So you run and get them. You're running around the house thinking of all these things that you might need. You're grabbing them, you're stuffing them into bags, and then you run out to the car and put them. You can actually, and you look up at the sky and it's actually gone quite dark. You can now smell the smoke. You look on your Vic Emergency app and you see that, no, the fire's not quite in your area yet, but you can smell smoke. You look up and it's getting dark and you think, oh, the photos of the 21st that you've just been to, you need to get them because you're pretty sure that they're only on the camera. So you race back in, you grab them. Can you imagine now how you're feeling? You know the fire's getting close, you can smell, you're using your senses, but you need these things. You want to make sure that you've got these things safe. So you grab them and you run back out to the car. You decide that this is it. You're going to hop in the car and go now. But as you hop in the car, you see those embers falling. You see them falling onto the roof. You see them falling into the big tree that's beside your house, on that pile of leaves that you've always meant to, that you've been meaning to clean up. So now how do you feel? Now what are you going to do? What is your body telling you at this stage? And what are you actually going to do? I think you will see that from me talking about this scenario, in this situation, it's not real life, it's me talking you through it. But you can feel the adrenaline happening with just even thinking about it. So imagine if you're really in that situation. How would you feel? What would you do? What could you have done differently to not be in that situation? What could you have done so that you weren't in this near panic, stressful situation where you're trying to save yourself, your documents, your important thing, your animals. And on top of that, you haven't even thought about where your kids are, where your partner is, where your mother is, where the next door neighbours, how they're faring, just down the road. Those sorts of things you haven't even thought about yet. And these are all turning around in your mind.
It's quite amazing, isn't it, Julie? You know, you've given a great description there of someone that's kind of, you know, in a very difficult spot. You know, they're bombarded with all these choices and decisions that they have to make. But, you know, as some of our chat people have just come back and said, well, you know, don't be there. Take the emergency bag, leave early in the morning, particularly if you know it's an extreme day. Be prepared. Have that consideration for your neighbours, for loved ones, for family, for pets, all the important things when you've got the time on your hands, when you've got the time to be able to think clearly and plan. In a fire situation, running around frantically, finding stuff that you think you should have had, that you kind of know where it is, but you're not sure, that's not the way to be. And it's those last minute actions that cause fatalities. And we know that from a number of fires that have happened across the state. It's about the lack of preparation that causes those fatalities. That poll clearly demonstrates the need to have an emergency bag. It also demonstrates the need to plan ahead. Use your senses, look at the FDR, monitor the Vic Emergency app, monitor the warnings, but the moment you get a feeling that things aren't right, you need to move yourself away from that dangerous situation. Mitigate the risk and move away.
So yes, Raj, in the chat function, people have said, have that bag with all that stuff at your door. So if you could run back, If that's the case, then you can just grab it straight away. Others have said check that your neighbours know what they're doing when you know that it's an extreme day. The night before, give them a ring, let them make sure that they know what the conditions will be like the next day, and that they have their plan as well. Just to take some of those things so that you don't have to worry about those things on the day, because you know that you've put them in place. You have a plan and you are prepared.
Wonderful. Thanks, Julie. And this is just a summary of those key points. We do offer a bushfire planning workshop, and again, the resource pack will allow you to access that information. We can't emphasize enough the importance of the Vic Emergency app. Download that to your phone, and that's something that the PAVS presenters do when they visit community members. And planning, as an ex-Cub Scout, planning is our mantra. Be prepared. I have to make mention to COVID-19 at this stage. This horrible situation is still with us as I speak today. The CFA will allow you to travel for the purpose of preparing your property during the fire season. But also, you may leave a high-risk fire area on a day of high fire danger as well. So that's another important consideration. Let's move into survival options, because, even the best laid plans can fail. And we need to know what is it that we can do to stay safe or to protect ourselves to the best of our abilities. Some of these areas we've already discussed through the radiant heat animation that we saw earlier. We spoke about the very nature of radiant heat and how damaging it is, even at a short distance and for a short time frame. The only real protection, or some level of protection, can be afforded by having as much of your bare skin covered as possible. It's not ideal, but it'll give you some element of protection from radiant heat. We also spoke about seeking shelter, and more about that in the next slide. It might be a fantastic idea and a strong suggestion to have these elements of clothing, the hat, the boots, the gloves, as part of your emergency bag. Should you not be able to have time to get changed, grab the bag, go to somewhere where you've got a bit of time, change into it in a sheltered spot, and seek shelter. When we talk about radiant heat, we also need to be mindful that the only way to protect yourself from the indiscriminate nature of this invisible killer of life, is to shelter behind or inside solid objects, such as sheds or buildings or dams, behind concrete water tanks. Radiant heat travels in straight lines. It doesn't bend around corners, so that's another place of refuge. But be mindful that radiant heat will penetrate glass, so be mindful of not to be around glass, since it may break or shatter and cause further damage. When we talk about seeking refuge, and this is all, we don't want to be in this situation. We want to avoid all the scenarios, all these survival techniques that I'm telling you about. But should you be caught in that unfortunate spot where there is an advancing fire front, you are in a difficult situation, you have left it too late to leave, there is an emergency warning or shelter in place, then there are certain areas that you can go to seek shelter. Water courses, be it a river, a dam, or a swimming pool, will offer a level of protection from an advancing fire. We'll also talk about stationary cars and the need and the possibility of seeking refuge in a stationary vehicle, be it a truck or a van or a car. Vehicles are designed to get you from A to B. They are not designed to seek shelter, and they are not a place of refuge. And I think Julie might add a few more notes on that from a CFA perspective.
And thank you, Raj. None of these places are guaranteed your survival. So if you have to shelter in a river or a dam or a swimming pool, there is still no guarantee that you will survive in those places. But these are in emergency situations where you have no other options. And a stationary car is the same. You should never drive through fire. So you never actually try and drive through fire once you know the fire's on the road. But if you're caught in that situation, then there are a few things that you can do. Once again, there's no guarantee you will survive. So drive off the side of the road if you can, into a cleared or bare area. And that may be already a burnt area. You don't want fuel around you. So don't stay on the road. You don't want to block the road for emergency vehicles, and you don't want to be in the road and cause an accident of other cars. You saw that animation where there were all those cars on the road. So you don't want to be in that situation. Once you're in the car, keep your lights on so people can see you. Get down below the windows to try and avoid that radiant heat, and monitor the situation. If you are in a burnover situation where the fire goes over you, it will be very quick. It will be hot, windy, uncomfortable, be horrible. Have water in the car so that you can stay hydrated. Help your body overcome that shock of being there, and then exit the car onto burnt ground. Don't get out of the car and try and run from the fire. Raj has already talked about fast-moving fires, and certainly no hiding behind hills. But remember, all of these places are never guaranteed to actually save your life. They are all emergency places, and that includes the neighbourhood safer place, which Raj will now talk a little bit more about.
Oh, thanks, Julie. Yes, I'd like to pay particular reference to our bushfire neighbourhood safer places, okay? These bushfire neighbourhood safer places are designed as a place of last resort, and they are appropriately and rightly named as a place of last resort. They are your last resort. Don't expect a high level of service when you get to these locations. Don't expect a welcoming party and hot drinks and that kind of setup. It's not designed to be that kind of setup. It's designed to give you an option, a last resort option. Critically, these are positioned away or to limit the amount of radiant heat that will impact you. There is minimum fuel load in the vicinity of a bushfire place of last resort. Interestingly, the nearest bushfire place of last resort for Noorat is actually the Noorat Recreation Reserve at 65 McKinnon's Bridge Road, within about 5 k's of the Noorat community. A further 17.5 kilometres away is the Mortlake Market Square, another bushfire place of last resort. And a further 19 kilometres away from Noorat is an option in Camperdown, where there is another bushfire place of last resort located on the north side of Manifold Street. There's also another bushfire place of last resort in Cobden, which is 19 k's away. But the understanding that I want to make clear here is that they are all places of last resort. You, as I'm sure will know by now, the importance of instigating an emergency plan, your fire plan, to leave the locality of Noorat in the event of an approaching fire. The moment you get wind of something's happening in your area, leave and leave early. Have that emergency plan, have that emergency bag, make sure community members are all on the same page and that you are going to leave and leave early. I show the next slide really for a graphic impression of exactly what fires can do and what they're all about. And I'm sure that you got that sense already from some of the animations that we've already seen. A fast-moving grass fire, the plumes of smoke, the canopy fires, the advancing hot embers, it's not a pleasant space. It's a dark space, it's a noisy space, and it's full of danger and unexpected danger. I'd like to make particular mention at this stage also to some of the resources that both Julie and I have been referring to. These are all downloadable resources and include a guide to survival, a fantastic quick read, but a very precise and concise document, a guide to property preparation, as is offered by the Property Advice Visits Service that I mentioned earlier, the PAV service. And of course, CFA can and has bushfire planning workshops that we can help you with to organise for your community, should you wish. And of course, the all-important Vic Emergency app. It's crucially important that you make contact and have a good relationship with your brigade. Your Noorat Brigade Captain, Michael Williams, has been extremely helpful in some of the information that I've used to prepare this localised presentation. Michael is more than open to offer any advice and guidance that he can give regarding safety in your community and ideas around a fire plan, and also the capacity and capability of the local brigade. Michael was happy for me to share his number with you. Here at the CFA, actually, before we go to this final slide, let's do our final poll, Julie.
Thank you, Raj. Yes, the final poll is simply for us to give us a better understanding of how we went in this presentation and how the CFA can help. So what we're asking is, did this meeting give you a better understanding of bushfire risks or grass fire risks in your local area? And would you recommend this program, this webinar, to family, friends or neighbours that live in fire-prone areas? So if you could just answer those two questions. Remember, we don't know who's answered what, so it's completely anonymous, and press the submit button when you've done that. And I will end the polling and share the results. And thank you very much. It is good to see that, yes, it has confirmed what some people already knew, and it has given other people a better understanding, and that they would recommend this to family and friends. So I'll stop sharing those results. Thank you, Raj.
Fantastic. Thanks, Julie. I almost forgot about that final poll.
I would remind you, it's okay, Raj.
and that final poll is critical to the worth of this presentation. Is what we're doing useful to your community? And by all accounts it is. We are here to empower you with information that will actually save lives. It'll give you a better understanding of what to expect from a fire, and it'll give you a footing as to how you're going to respond to a fire by way of preparing your fire plan. I acknowledge that some of the content may have been somewhat alarming for some people. If this is the case, please feel free to contact some of the contact support numbers that we have here. Fire is a dangerous force of nature, and what we can do to mitigate that risk is to be away from that dangerous environment. Have a fire plan and leave early. Care for each other in our cohesive communities and look out for each other. My name is Raj, and Julie, my co-host. Thank you for being with us this morning for this morning's presentation. I thank the community of Noorat for their time, their comments, and also their feedback. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Raj. Stop the recording.